And Cozy, you're all set.
All right. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. We thank you for joining us tonight. This is another edition of our Simsbury Let's Talk, which is being sponsored by the Simsbury SPIRIT Council and definitely in partnership with the Simsbury Public Library that allows us to use their Zoom forum so that we can hold these discussions. Again, the Simsbury SPIRIT Council, Simsbury Problem, oh Lord, and Simsbury Problem and Resolution of Issues Together. I think I'm missing a letter in there, but the point of our council has been to bring issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, to the town of Simsbury. There's been, it started. We have a big kickoff with this urgency, for such a topic, just due to some of the issues that not only have happened in town, but have been across the country. And so one of the ways that we've been able to respond is by forming this committee. And so due to the COVID pandemic, we have not been able to meet in person, but what we have been able to do is have a series of these Let's Talk discussions via the Zoom format. And so that's what we are here. This is now our 11th discussion that we've had. We've had discussions ranging from, non-racist versus anti-racist, Hispanic Heritage Month. We've done, we just did Asian and Pacific Islander heritage. We've done Indigenous Peoples Month. We have human trafficking. We've done a variety of topics, and again, they're not, perhaps they're topics that we know about, but they're not necessarily topics that we have discussion about, so these things we might see in the news, things that we might have some sort of knowledge, regarding, but when we have these forums, it allows us to get a little bit more in depth, it allows us to get a little more personal, and it allows us to hear from people, individuals that are representing the very topic that we are discussing. So it allows it to be more real, allows it to be more personal, and then it allows us to grow, as individuals, and more importantly, as individuals grow, it allows the community to grow. And so that has really been the purpose of these discussions, to allow for community growth as we grow as individuals. Biases, are destroyed through knowledge, as opposed to continuing to act in ignorance. And so it becomes very, very beneficial. We find that our panelists enjoy it because sometimes it just gives them an outlet, perhaps sometimes just to be able to vent, at the same time as they're educating. And so it becomes beneficial for all parties that are involved. And so that's why we're continuing with this work. And so we're here tonight, dealing with the topic of Pride Month. And so this is our topic for June. And so we have another great panel that is, people, individuals that have taken their time out to join us tonight, to share some of their stories, to share their experiences, and to share their knowledge with our forum tonight. And so we'd like to say thank you, and we're gonna welcome our 6 panelists, that we have. And so I'm just gonna go read their names in order. Maybe you could wave your hands or such as your names are read. I'm not gonna get into a bio, but we're gonna just introduce them. They could, again, wave their hands. We're gonna have a statement of purpose by our own Spirit Council member, Reverend Jean Ott. And then from there, we're just gonna allow our panelists to tell us about themselves and what it is they want us to know about them. And then from there, we'll be able to move forward with questions. So if you're part of the audience, we definitely would like for you to participate. We definitely would like for you to ask questions, as they arise. You can raise your hand if you have a question. We have folks that are watching the chat line. So if you have a question, you can put it in through the chat as well. But we definitely would encourage you to participate, because obviously the more questions we have, it allows for more discussion, and it also allows for more growth. So you could be a listener, but please do not remain silent in that sense. All right, so first, our first panelist that we have is Elisa Del Valle, and she is here with us. She's our first two-time member panelist, because she was with us for Hispanic Heritage Month as well. So she is our first two-timer. So it's so nice she had to do it twice. Thank you so much, Elisa, for joining us once again. Also, we have Courtney Pollock. Thank you for joining us as well, Courtney. Reverend Aaron Miller. All right. More reverence. Keep the anointing flowing. We have Lindsay Pasquale. All right. Thank you for joining us, Lindsay. And we have Regina Dighton. All right. Thank you as well, Regina. And last but not least, we have David Figluzzi also joining us. So these are our 6 panelists. Again, we thank you for taking the time out to join us tonight out of your schedules. I know there's probably many other things you can be doing at this time, but we thank you for choosing to be with us on this evening. So the next thing that we have a statement of purpose read by our Reverend Gene Ott.
I was thinking about our time together and what we'd like to get out of this time with this panelist and time spent. And so here's what I would ask of us tonight. This is a time for some answers, for good listening, and the safety to ask questions. We're likely not going to get to everything tonight. It would be nearly impossible, but our time, no matter, should be built on mutual trust and inclusivity. We'll do our best to steer clear of politics, but we will absolutely stay away from polemics. Remember, tonight our conversation is about people. And so everything that we do in our time together should be based on mutual respect and a recognition of our humanity.
All right. Thank you, Reverend Gene. And that just goes to say, we don't expect, any of, there to be any type of discourse or conflict. But, if there is any topics, any conversations that we start to see that there is any type of, disrespectful overtones, any hostile overtones, just to let it be known that we do reserve the right to remove anyone from the Zoom chat if we feel that it is doing harm, to the environment that we're of community that we're trying to foster here through our discussion. So we have never had anything but respect in any of our discussions, but nevertheless, we just have to allow that, just to let that be known, up front. So again, we thank you all for joining us as an audience and as panelists. And we thank you again, the Simsbury Public Library, for allowing us to have this forum. And so first and foremost, we're gonna have Elisa speak. And go ahead, Elisa.
Hi, thank you, Nkosi. So I'm Elisa Del Valle. I'm the Director of Social Justice and Inclusion at the Ethel Walker School here in Simsbury, Connecticut. I moved to Simsbury 3 summers ago and live here with my partner and our 2 children and our foster baby. And I think that something that's important to share right from the onset is I only just came out as queer 2 years ago. I spent a long time hiding from my family, primarily. So much so that I even married a man and divorced him after having my first child. And I think that the internalization of that process with my family and the ways in which I saw homophobia show up in my family created a lot of fear that is significant to the way that I came to the journey to my own identity.
All right. Thank you, Elisa. Next, if we have Courtney.
Hi, my name is Courtney Pollock. I work at ESPN, I'm a facilities AV infrastructure technician, which basically means I support Zoom meetings all day long. So this is nothing new for me. I'm also the technology chair for PFLAG Hartford, on the board there. I volunteer for Cheshire's Lights of Hope, as well as the Capital Region Medical Reserve Corps, which I did a lot of work for them over this past year during the pandemic. And with all of the hours that I was able to put in, I was just awarded ESPN's Volunteer of the Year for 2020. I identify as a transgender gay woman. I have 2 children, both in their 20s. My daughter also identifies as gay. And I took some other notes and it went away. So I'm going to pass it on.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. Next, Reverend Aaron Miller.
Well, good evening, and it's so good to be with you, and thank you for this invitation. I'm Reverend Aaron Miller. I'm the pastor of the Metropolitan Community Church of Hartford, and I have been there for 10 years now. If you don't know anything about MCC, I would just tell you that it's a Christian denomination that started in 1968 because LGBTQ folks were not welcome in their churches. And so this denomination, this church and denomination started to support and give us a place to worship and to have a relationship with each other and with God. So I'm also the chaplain. I just named actually and invited to be the chaplain for the Yale Gender Program. And I'm starting that work with 3 to 25-year-olds as their chaplain. And I'll be doing some training and support there as well. I do education in different venues. I also feel very strongly for social justice, since this denomination was started for that very thing. We're as much ministry as we are social justice. Also, I'm out trans clergy. I started my transition 13 years ago. And my primary focus in all that I do is to help improve life, for everybody that's coming up, but especially children, but also to blend back in, if you will, or raise back up, or have us be in touch with our spirituality, because a lot of times religion comes in the way of that. And so a lot of my work is dispelling what religion has said to the spirituality that we need to claim, proclaim, and to access in order to get through what we go through in this life. So thank you for welcoming me.
No problem. Thank you, Reverend. Okay, next we have Lindsay Pasquale.
Thank you, Nkosi. I'm Lindsay Pasquale. I am a transgender, non-binary person. Same as Elisa, I've only relatively recently come out. I just changed my name in the middle of April and socially transitioned and at work and all of that. Although I've been really actively dealing with things for about the last 7 years. I am on the board of directors for the New Haven Pride Center and for PFLAG Hartford with Courtney. I'm an admin in a international non-binary group on Facebook. We have 2 of them. Between the 2, we have 40,000 combined membership in an active community, and the members range in age from 13 to 80. Although the ages do kind of skew to the young side. With non-binary people, you'll see that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. A lot of them are, most of them are between 80% or 24 or less. I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s, and trying to figure out who I was in that time period was difficult because there were no real examples of non-binary people at that time. And every time I would start trying to puzzle through things and say, okay, maybe I am a woman. And there would always be something, it'd be like, but, and then there would be something else. And gender and sexuality were tightly coupled back in those days too, or at least the thinking on gender and sexuality. So even if I could have sorted things out, it would still always come down to, but I don't like men. And so I couldn't possibly be a woman. And at some point in my life, I just kind of threw my hands up in the air, getting ready to go to college, and said, I can't live, I can't live like this. I need to pick a path and just figure out how to get by. And I think a lot of people like me in my age group were like that, because there was no representation, there were no examples, there was no language, there was no internet, there weren't even books in the library. And I'm sure if there were, gay people in the audience now that, trying to deal with some of that stuff, and you're going to go into the library and check out a book on sexuality. If it even existed, it probably had crayon drawn pictures in it. So I think now we see that, and really in the last 10 years, the language is there to describe some of these experiences. And this is why I think you see a lot of younger people that identify as non-binary. Some people look at them and think that this came out of nowhere, and the term transgender is thrown around a little bit. And nothing could be further from the truth. With the internet, people were able to talk to each other and find that there were other people out there like themselves that had common experiences, and they were able to talk through these things, and from that, language developed, or they found the writing from authors that had some of this language and disseminated it. And that's why I think I've run into a lot of older transgender people who have told me that if they were back transitioning again, they might view themselves more as non-binary if things like that were around as examples at the time that they were doing their transition. So this is something I see as being one of the reasons why you don't see as many older non-binary people. But slowly but surely we're catching up. And I know for me, when I started really dealing with my gender, it was one of the things I learned in one of my first therapy sessions. And I'm grateful after all these years to finally have the language to describe my experience and myself.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you. All right. Next, we have Regina Dighton.
Hey, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. It's interesting how much I was listening to everybody, how much time we spend trying to name ourselves, identify ourselves, say who and what we are. First thing I knew about myself, first label I had for myself as a child was that I was colored. My birth certificate says I'm colored. I was born in 1953. And seemed like that was the totality of what I was allowed to be. I'm also a writer, and I invented, or whatever, created a program for my writing group called Journey Writers Tell the Whole Story, Queer Black History. And we perform this every February. And so many of the characters that we bring forth in history that folks know about, but they might not know their whole story, struggled so much, especially those from the 1950s, with were they going to be advocates for civil rights, or were they going to stand up for queer rights? And it seemed like it's going to be one or the other, make up your mind. So that's something I struggled with for a lot of my life. And then knowing that I had an attraction to women, and every once, maybe about 20% of the time, a man, a rather gentle man, a man other people assumed was gay, and sometimes he assumed he was too, but we did it anyway. Liked it. I really was like knowing, oh my goodness, these boxes are just that. They're really, really, constrict us. So for a long time after, I was colored, then I was finally Black, and then I could call myself a lesbian. And then when I called myself bisexual, people said, make up your mind, So today I'm just really happy with queer. And basically it's just like, I do what I want to do. And if I had to kind of look at where my attractions are, how some people don't like their food to touch? I want my food all mixed up and mashed up together. And that's kind of like my approach to life. I love it where it's gray or pastel or where you blend things, you know? And so I find that I like women with what are thought of as traditionally more masculine traits and men who are thought of as having more feminine traits. And that includes cisgender and transgender men and women. Really like that. I really feel like I fall in love with somebody's soul. So, I mean, that's who I am on that one. I'm all up on justice for everybody. I'm a big, and I don't mean this in a bragging way, I mean this in terms of where my heart is. Real big ally, advocate, fighter for transgender rights. And that comes out of having a transgender girlfriend as a little girl. You know, I was 4, she was 7. And I would say I'm so happy that I met her before they had a chance to like shape my mind into tradition, you know, because I never doubted that was my girlfriend. And sadly, as with so many Black transgender women, she was murdered in Trenton, New Jersey. And so a lot of the stuff I've done, I continue to do in her memory, and I know she's one of my angels. So that's who I am.
All right. Thank you very much, Regina.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing as well. All right. And then the last panelist we're gonna have introduce themselves is David Figluizzi. I hope I said it right.
Works.
All right, David. And so David's gonna introduce himself, and then we're gonna go kind of transition into maybe as part of his introduction, but breaking down some of the letters of the alphabet that we have, the LGBTQIA+. So David, you know, with your introduction, then you could allow it to flow right into that, if that's all right. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, especially with such an esteemed panel. As Nkosi said, I'm David Figluizzi. I am a 3rd year Master of Divinity student at Yale Divinity School, pursuing a 2nd career in ministry. I currently serve at an open and affirming church, the First Church of Christ in Suffield, Connecticut, which is also the town where I live with my partner, Rob. Prior to beginning divinity school, I had a long career in healthcare. I worked at Cigna with some fine folks I see here. Hi, Jenny. And my last role before leaving the organization to go back to school was as the Chief Diversity Officer. And so in that job, I really worked to create a more equitable workplace. And I used that experience. I do part-time work for an organization based in Windsor called the National Conference for Community and Justice, where I have done social justice training, primarily on anti-racism, but sometimes on LGBTQ sensitivity work, all around the state with a diverse number of and types of organizations, employers, and school systems. And it's work that I love, and I do for a number of reasons. One, because I believe that all of our freedom is tied up together, and that when one of us in our humanity is oppressed, that all of us experience oppression as a result. And the second reason I do this is particularly for the generation behind me. So a few years ago, the CDC did a study, found that 25% of 18 to 24-year-olds, all 18 to 24-year-olds, had seriously considered suicide. We know that that number is significantly higher in the LGBTQ+ population of young people. But there's an organization called the Trevor Project that is very concerned about the well-being of young people that found that if LGBTQ youth have one person and one space that is open and affirming, that significantly reduces the chance of them doing self-harm. So I think for all of you that came here today, this is like CPR, because you could have a chance to save a life by being here. And so that's my passion. That's why I do this work. So thank you for all of you that are attending. And several people have said this, and I just want to reiterate. wherever you are in your journey of understanding all of this and the constantly changing language, I want you to know that that's okay, because you're here. And just because you're here means you're willing to learn and to be open. And so I know we won't have time to get to every question, especially when an aspiring preacher is talking. I can go on for a whole long time. But I hope we get to most of them. And I hope that you can leave here today knowing that you've had a chance to ask some of the questions. And if they seem to you silly or elemental, please ask them, because I would really hate to leave here knowing that someone didn't get a chance to ask something that was important for them to know. Okay, so we have heard some really interesting terms listening to our panel introduce themselves. We've heard some interesting terms from people like Demi Lovato most recently, who introduced the term non-binary into popular culture. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to expand on some of those, and thank you to my colleagues who are posting some definitions. It's always helpful for people to read, learn that way as well. So I'm going to move relatively quickly, but we'll have lots of time to circle back and hear from other panelists as well. So if we just start with LGBT, most of us probably are aware lesbian is a term that is basically a gay woman, a woman who is attracted to other women. The term gay is a little bit more difficult in that we sometimes think of gay as only applying to men, as men who are attracted to men, but gay can also be used as an umbrella term. And the term queer, I think someone used that term here tonight as well, Lisa. The term queer can also be used as an umbrella term also. So there's some nuances to the terms, but we've got the L and the G, the B, we heard the term bisexual used, a person who is attracted to people of the same gender and of the opposite gender. So LGB. The T is transgender, and again, a term that we've heard tonight. So transgender, you'll sometimes hear that abbreviated to trans. It's an adjective that is used to describe someone whose gender identity is different than the sex they were assigned at birth. And I'll say that one more time because there's a lot of terms in there we'll have to unpack. But it's someone whose gender identity is different than the sex they were assigned at birth. And this is sometimes a head scratcher for people. So let's talk just a little bit about what that means. So this is pretty simple. When a baby is born, we really do one thing, which is we look and see what's there, what's visible to the eye, and we assign a sex in our system based on that. So that is the assigned sex. Now, science would tell us that sex is really a product of genitalia, chromosomes, and hormones, but we don't standardly do all that testing on a newborn unless there's some sort of signal to the doctor to do more testing. So that sex is assigned at birth solely based on what is visible to the eye. Okay, so that's the sex assigned at birth. Now, gender identity, that's something that's relatively new, our newer terminology. That's something that's internal. That is someone's sense of self and the sense of their gender. That could mean that I was assigned a sex at birth, but my gender identity tells me that that doesn't match who I am on the inside, right? So sometimes we start to see a difference, right? And that's that transgender identity. There is a difference between the sex assigned at birth and my gender identity. Now that gender identity, that internal sense of gender could be, I feel like I'm male, I feel like I'm female, or it could feel like I'm neither of those, or it could feel like I've got parts of both of those in me, right? And so how I choose to express that gender expression is how I choose to present myself outwardly. The clothes I wear, the things that our culture and our society equates with gender. Now, I like to think that when we think about gender, so if we were in a room together, we'd spend a whole lot of time doing this exercise, and I guarantee you it's a whole lot of fun, but I'm gonna cut to the chase. So if you walk through a supermarket checkout aisle, look at the cover of Men's Health, right? So a man now has 8-pack abs, and he can fix a car, and he can play all the sports, right? Well, you know what? Very few of us fit into that definition, right? And this is why sometimes you hear it said that gender is a societal construct, right? Because, then how does the society construct the female gender? Well, they should be blonde and curvaceous, like to cook. They should be attracted to men. They should, there's all of these characteristics. And when you really spend some time on this, two things come out. The first is, and I encourage you to do this if you have young people in your life, this exercise will take you an hour, and they will really enlighten you as to what's happening in the schools of their halls of their school. What happens when people, so the first thing is none of us are really gender conforming to society, right? There are all these things that none of us do. I don't like to fix cars. There's lots of ways that all of us don't fit into those descriptions. But the second and the most painful one is that because that is so ingrained in us, when somebody veers outside the lines of that gender construct, we're pretty brutal in putting people back in. And if you ask a young person, or even adults, what do we call men who don't fit into that cultural, societal definition of being male? Well, the language very quickly gets pretty brutal, right? It's really an attack. And so our society draws some really strict lines around that, and it makes it very painful for people who don't fall into those lines. And I really believe that none of us completely fall into those lines. I'm going to hit on just two more definitions that I think are important before I pause and we get into some questions. And the first is non-binary. And I mentioned Demi Lovato. I think I got at least 5 phone calls the week she described herself as non-binary from friends who are in my age group, which is not young, saying, hey, what does that term mean? And should I be doing something different? So the textbook definition is non-binary is a term that can be used by people who do not describe themselves or their genders as either male or female. Sometimes non-binary can be the term gender queer might be used. The language is always changing, and we're always trying to stay up on it. And if there are people in your life that are very comfortable with this language, don't ever be afraid to ask. Don't ever be afraid to ask. And then the one final term that I want to talk about is the I in LGBTQI, which is intersex. I talked a little bit in the beginning about assigning sex based on 3 factors. Intersex is a physical condition, right, where people don't fit physically the condition of being typically male or female. That could mean that you have external genitalia that's confusing to the doctor. It could mean chromosomes and hormones don't match what the other is saying. We talk very little about intersexism in our culture, but you should know that this is as common as a child being born with red hair. So this is not infrequent. And that up until just recently, well, it's still legal in many states. Because those gender binary lines that I talked about are so strong, the preferred approach has been for a physician to genitally mutilate an infant to make them match these lines without giving this child a chance to develop. That has been outlawed, as far as I know, in California, and the American Academy of Pediatrics has come out against such practices unless it's necessary for genitourinary health. So that is a field that is still changing, and the intersexed are largely unseen. So I wanted to just make sure to make a little space for that in our conversation also. Okay, that was a lot of territory we covered. So I'm going to pause, and Nkosi, I'm going to give it back to you.
All right, well, thank you, David, for I think you gave us the headline when you said an expiring preacher. So that's it. So we can expect, you to be verbose, and it's okay because you know what you're saying. All right, so we're gonna move to a few questions, and they're just gonna start on the general question. So anyone who wishes to answer, feel free to. And so the first question that we have is about, when did you first realize your identity / sexuality? And you could just get started. All right, Regina, go ahead.
I'll start. It's funny, I was writing a piece about it, like, how did I miss it? So, your first crush isn't sexual, it's just purely romantic, And I remember being 6 I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey, and standing on the porch waiting for my godfather to give me a ride to Sunday school. And I had on my crinoline puffy dress, loved it. I mean, I love being female. I had on my little frilly dress, my frilly socks, my patent leather shoes, and my pocketbook. And what am I doing? I'm looking across the street at whatever, as in a typical Black neighborhood, you not only have a name, you got a title, a nickname, or whatever. I'm looking at Wanda the Bulldagger. And I'm waving, going, Wanda, Wanda, do you like my dress, Wanda? Wanda, do you like my shoes? I was 6, she was about 13. She just kind of flicked her cool cigarette away and was like, oh, bother me, little girl. But at any rate, it's like I saw a sign. The first time I sort of knew anything, but it's like you know, but you're not allowed to know. I distinctly remember being 10 and being aware that I was enamored with my mother's friend, Lenore. And then her behind to me looked like a big upside down Valentine, like a box of chocolates. And I was just staring at Lenore. And when she left, I announced dreamily, when I grow up, I'm gonna marry a lady. And my father came whirling out of the kitchen like a Tasmanian devil to tell me, some things you don't think, some things you don't say, and you never, ever do. So it was early on, the signs were there.
Thank you, Regina. Does anyone else wish to, share with that? Okay, Reverend Aaron.
Well, I tell you, I have to, I'll tell you my age when I say this story, but I don't care. So I knew I was different, but when I knew exactly, and looking back, like Regina, you said, it's when you look back, because people ask, when did you know? And I remember the Peter Pan movie, the first Peter Pan movie was with Mary Martin playing Peter Pan. And so that tells you that's the 60s. And I remember seeing her fall in love with a girl and as Peter Pan. And I said, for the first time, that made sense to me. Like the world made sense, absolute clarity and sense. So I didn't end up marrying anybody named Wendy, but I'm not done yet. So who knows?
We have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay. The first question we have is from Jenny Uting. I hope I said that correctly. And perhaps it might, follow along with Regina, the story you were saying about, what your father had said. But her question is, what do you wish someone had said to you sooner to make you feel accepted and loved for who you are? And that's just a general question. So if anyone, anyone could take the.
I'll take a stab answering in a slightly different way. I think I found there's this part of the expectation of that question is we've always known exactly who we are 100% to be able to want to have something like that. And the truth is, I don't think any of us, whether we're LGBTQ or we're anywhere else in life, really truly fully know ourselves at all times. And for a lot of us, anyway, I'll speak for me. For me, it took a long time to really figure out who I was to be able to need to have that acceptance. So I think what I would wish was growing up and now, just if you saw positive portrayals of people so that by the time I figured out who I was, I could look out in the world and see positive things for my identity and feel like I'd be embraced and be welcomed. So it's not like snap the thing and you're gonna give me some magic words. It's doing that, creating that environment all along that make people feel loved and welcome, and that when they finally figure themselves out and want to come out, that it's okay.
Yeah, the first thing I thought of was the things I wish people didn't say. Like, I wish my father didn't always say, goddamn queers, you know, followed by niggas ain't shit. You know, the things I wish people didn't say, that I wish people weren't taunted and called sissies and faggots and dykes and, you know, and beat up and harassed. What not saying that would mean a whole lot. And then I agree with Lindsay, just seeing examples of people living their lives in a variety of ways.
I think for me, a lot of the language growing up basically inferred that you were broken and you needed fixing. Yeah, that's pretty damaging language.
Right. I know Courtney as well. You had your hand up to respond to this as well.
Yeah. So, you know, speaking for the majority of the panel, not all of us, but we come from a different generation than today, and we didn't have the internet. We didn't have LGBTQ plus characters on TV and in movies and everywhere. So it was a lot harder. And, to learn how to love yourself, if you're growing up knowing that you're different and it's something that you fight. I didn't transition until I was in my mid-30s. And it took, I want to say, a divine action. I was at the point, I have 2 children who were 3 and 5 at the time, where I couldn't love myself. I couldn't accept myself. And I was driving on a dark, windy road, and I kept pushing on the accelerator and going faster and faster because I didn't want it. I couldn't accept myself or love myself anymore. And my phone rang from a friend who I hadn't talked to in over a year, right at that moment. And I slowed down, I pulled over and I talked to her, and I didn't tell her what was happening. But it was at that moment that I knew that I had to do something in order to be there for my children and to start to learn how to accept myself and love myself. Now, 17, 18 years later into my transition, I do still struggle with that. I have my good days, I have my bad days. So it's not so much that somebody can tell you, and we look at the generations today because they have all of these wonderful resources. And, like David had mentioned earlier, we're trying to give back to the people, that come after us. We're trying to pave the way, just like other generations have paved the way for us. When I was 5 years old, I knew when I was 5 years old that something was different. My eye doctor was Renee Richards. I didn't know what transgender was back then, but lo and behold, that's kind of how I knew that, okay, people can do this. So, trying to love yourself and accept yourself, I think, is an ongoing process, no matter where you are in your journey. Even if you're heterosexual and you're cisgender, I mean, it's just, we're all human beings, and it's just a part of who we are. So.
And
Thank you.
Josie,
I think we had there was a question for Elisa. I think it's probably speaks to the cultural component. And the question was asking about talk about your experience being part of the LGBTQIA plus community in the Hispanic and Latinx community, and how you've been able to navigate it, like challenges, barriers, and wins, etc. So that's a question. I can't see who it is from, but I see the question has been asked.
Yeah, no, I saw that come in from Jose. And, I think a part of why I waited so long to come out was because of the cultural implications. I think in my experience and in my family experience, there are specific derogatory words that get used in Spanish to talk about folk. There are specific cultural implications about what women are supposed to do and what men are supposed to do in a really binary way in Latinx culture specifically. And from a very young age, I remember really feeling like there was only one way for me to sort of show up in the world in the body that I was born into. And that was to learn how to cook and clean really well, be an excellent dancer, and like boys. And I knew many of those things, right? I do love cooking, and not because I identify as a woman, but because I love to eat food, right? Which is a different thing, right? And I do love dancing because I think it's fun and I feel free in my body in that expression, not because my hips move a specific kind of way, right? And I actually love women. And for a long time, I had to convince myself and trick myself into loving men because my family had really clear expectations about what I was supposed to do. And, you know, so some of the barriers were specific to the way that language got used, both in my home and in my neighborhood. I grew up in New York, and then specifically connected to, you know, I didn't cut my hair for the longest time. I didn't actually cut my hair short until I was about 30. I probably was about 32, 33, right? So this is 6 years ago. And I wouldn't cut it because I remember my grandma as a child saying to me that you could tell that people were lesbiana, right? Is how you would say it, when they had short hair. And so she would judge who people could have been attracted to based on how they sort of performed femininity, right? And I mean, as down to like how long or short your hair was. And so I had very long hair as a child and super long hair well into my adulthood, and didn't actually cut my hair until pretty late into my own journey of understanding self, because of the cultural implications as connected to the performance of femininity in my family and in Puerto Rican culture for my family in particular. And then if I'm thinking about some of the wins, right, you know, when I came out to my mom, we had to work on some of her word choice when she got angry about specific things. She got real colorful with her language when she was talking about people she was angry about, and used it in ways that was really derogatory. And so I remember it was Mother's Day weekend 2 years ago, and we were sitting at the table and she came over for dinner and she said something really derogatory. And I looked at her and I said, you know, that's gotta be rough for you because your daughter's one of those people. And I used the word back at her and she paused. And for the first time, I saw her realize the hurt that she was creating by using that language. And she's been working on it ever since. And so the win came from the learning that she had, but the real win, and I might cry about it because it's a big deal. And my mom called me, it was probably a year ago now. And she said to me, I was having a conversation with your aunt. So my aunt was the only person who was a lesbian who I knew growing up. And she had married a man and had 2 kids just like I did. And then finally was like, the hell with all of y'all. I'm going to live my life the way I want to live. And then like did what she wanted to do. But she said, I was talking to your aunt and she was telling me that she like knew that she liked girls when she was like 5. And I said to my mom, yeah, I knew that I liked girls when I was like 7. I said, so, you know, and she again had a moment of pause and then said to me, I'm so sorry I didn't give you room to love who you wanted to love.
Mm.
And that was a win because she could acknowledge her role in the limitations
she built for me as a young person, right? In her narrow view. I mean, and listen, I give my mom all the room in the world. She had me when she was 16. My dad was an addict. Like, I mean, I give her all the room in the world. She was just figuring it out. And to hear her openly apologize for hurt that she realized she created and limitations that she had put in my way because she didn't know better was so healing in my relationship with her, with myself, with that part of my identity. And so it's been rough to sort of like name and move in Latinx culture in my queerness, but I've found that I actually care more about the freedom I need to have and the freedom I need to give to the three children that live in this house with me, that it's more important that they see that love is what makes a family and not your body parts or the performance of something that the world dictates it needs to look like, but that you get to define it for yourself.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Elisa. Thank you. All right. There's wow. All right. Thank you. And I guess that speaks to perhaps it's a good segue into our next question, Elisa. And this is a general question when it says, who has been your greatest support? And so that's an open question. So if anyone wishes to, Courtney, I saw your hand up.
My mom has been supportive from the day I told her. She obviously had no idea, because this was something I fought for so many years. And, you know, I got married, had kids, rode motorcycles, had some tattoos, and really tried to fight that feeling. And when I told her, she said, "You're my child. It doesn't matter to me." And she just bought me this pride bracelet the other day. I mean, it's her and my kids. The relationship I have with my kids, who I said earlier are young adults, they're in their 20s. They grew up, they were 3 and 5 when I started my transition. I'd already been divorced. We divorced for other reasons. But when I came out to their mother, she immediately, it became all about religion. And I was an abomination and God doesn't love me. And her family tried pushing this into my children's minds. And, you know, that's how kids learn. But I was fortunate enough that my kids were like, no. They're my parent. You know, that my son still refers to me as his dad, and I'm 150% fine with that. And now my relationship with my kids is a million times better than their relationship with their mother. And it's not a contest, but it's what you feel inside and how you support somebody. So my mom and my children are my biggest supporters.
Yeah, my wife and my kids, for sure. And been married to my wife 33 years now. She's my best friend, and I can't imagine my life without her in it. But she's also cisgender and she's heterosexual, and dealing with my identity changing from what she knew it, you know, as we've been going through things, that's not always the easiest thing to do. We talked at the beginning about the assigned gender at birth and gender identity and sexual attraction as concepts. And I remember when I first started therapy, learning about that, and it was like a mind-blown moment for me, because I always thought that there's only one way to be, and to know that, you know, these were all separate pieces that didn't need to line up was an eye-opener. And I remember the biggest thing I walked away from that first conversation was that if I have these things, then my wife does too. And if I want my wife to respect my gender identity, then I need to respect the fact that she has a sexual attraction. So throughout our process of working through things, it hasn't been just a focus on me and me, my relationship with the world changing, but also, on her and her identity as well. Because, changing my identity doesn't turn her into a lesbian. I mean, if I go out and get hit by a bus tomorrow, she's not going to start dating trans people or women. She's going to go date a guy. So it's, at this point in her life, she always refers to her sexuality as being me-sexual. It's kind of irrelevant at this point. But it's, I've always been, fear's not the right word, but there's been anxiety that at some point along the way in my changing my gender expression, as I grew comfortable with my gender identity, that I would cross a line and no longer be involved in a romantic relationship. And but if that is what was going to happen, I would want my wife to be happy. So it's, she's absolutely my biggest supporter, and
Right.
That's us.
Thank you. And I guess I have a question too, because I hear I think Courtney, you said you have children. Elisa, I don't know who else on the Lindsay that you said you have children. Marina, you have children as well. And so I guess my question would be, was that ever an issue? Was that ever a fear or something? Perhaps, I know that you have a children through another relationship. You have children as another person. Was that a fear, a wonder? Like, how do your kids react? How do you think they would react? Did they react differently than how you thought they would react? But I'm trying to fathom that, and it seems like it would be a pretty mind-blowing experience, coming from I guess a child's perspective. And so I'm just kind of asking how might that have gone, or how'd that go?
Yeah, so I'd like to start with that. So, and I think it's mind-blowing for adults and it's easy for kids, actually, because my son is 7 and my daughter's 5, and they have they understand that what makes a family is love. And so for them, it was pretty simple that, they had a hard time with the divorce, right? As most children do. But mostly when Suri and I started dating and she started coming around the kids, they welcomed her and they were excited about, you can hear them in the background, right? They're like having their whole little party over there. But they were comfortable with it because they actually have not been socially conditioned to only see love as one way. Right. And so for them, it was, and this is where it's interesting because there's a point where young people learn how to be, but if they grow up in an environment that gives them room to learn the complexities of different kinds of families and different kinds of, but that at the root of a family is love, it's not actually weird to them. It's more weird to the grown-ups than it is to the young people. And so my kids have been wonderful. They just asked Suri moved in last year, and they asked her just, I think a week ago, they said, so if we call mommy, but then we want to call you something else, but then we can't call you both mommy because then you're both going to look at us when we talk to you. So what if we call you mommy because you're mommy, and we call Suri mama? And then when we say mama, Suri can look. And when we say mommy, you can look. It makes perfect sense to them because they don't know anything else. Right. And so it's not until you get older and you start to get conditioned into typical gender roles and the gender binary that you start to then say, hey, this is weird. But if you grow up in a house where you understand family as love. I mean, my ex-husband is wonderful. He was just in the house this morning, came upstairs. I'm like in the bed hanging out with the baby. Suri comes upstairs. He comes upstairs because he's dropping off the dog. Like, we live in the future because families need to be expansive and they need to center young people and young people's needs and not adults' hurt and trauma. And so if you live in a family where you center young people and where you center love, they're gonna, I mean, my kids are gonna go out into the world and tell the kids who have, you know, parents who talk funny at home that like love is love and they have 2 moms and a dad and like what's wrong with them. And that difference has to be celebrated, not othered.
Thank you. My children are adults, and I, ditto everything Elisa said about children as young children. However, by the time they got to middle school, they were bullied about their mother having a girlfriend. And so that's the part where it gets hard. And my daughter's got that kind of personality where she was like, my son kept that. Like, he didn't bring it home and tell me. He didn't want to hurt my feelings. He didn't want me to worry. But, he kept that for way too long. And so that was something we worked out and talked about when he was an adult, but he did go through feelings of, well, is this okay? As a little kid, he was just great with it. And then, he got kind of quiet as a teenager. So, yeah, what can I say? It is what it is. Of course, I think it's also important to acknowledge intersectionality. So it wasn't only sexual orientation. They had to deal with bullying about race. From other people, that intersection is about disability or culture or immigration status or, any of those things. So it's kind of just a sad part of preparing children for life.
My kids are both older. My daughter's 26, my son's 21. But at the time when I first started talking about maybe telling the kids, my wife's really only asked for one thing in this entire, process, and that was to wait until my son got out of high school. And it was always an effort for him to concentrate to get through his studies, and he was doing well, and he was on the football team, high school is hard enough as it is, and you add in all the toxic masculinity you can get surrounding high school football on top of that. And I was glad to do it. It was, like I said, it's the only thing she really asked for. When he was finally out of high school, and I think we're on the way down to pick up his license after he passed his license test, is when I finally told him. My wife wanted me to wait to tell my daughter, until he was old enough. But I told her, when my daughter was, in college, I said, if she has to wait until he's out of high school, and that's when I finally tell her, she's going to be mad. And she's not going to be mad at me. and I think that was what finally at least convinced my wife to let me, tell my daughter earlier. And my daughter's roommate was lesbian, and as it turns out now, she's also non-binary. She and my daughter was on, the LGSA at her college, and she had at least 1 or 2 trans friends. It was, I wasn't too worried by the time I told her, but I was a little bit worried about my son. When I funny quick story, when I told my son I was going to change my name, and I said something to the fact that after being 5 years on hormones, I'm not going to get through another summer in summer heat without, wearing 8 layers of clothing if I don't do this. And and my son says, I'm not going to have to see you in a bikini, am I? and I said, no. And he said, but honestly, do you want to see your mother in a bikini? I said, you probably don't want to see your mother in a bikini either. And he says, you got that right. So,
there you go. That's all right.
Can I tackle this one on scripture? Would you mind if I went first?
Okay, I was gonna ask, but thank you, Lindsay. I was gonna ask Reverend Aaron if that's okay, because Reverend, we haven't.
I'll go. I can go quick, and then you can turn over to Reverend Aaron because he's got great insight on all this. But what you may not know about me is I would describe myself as a former conservative. I was a past Grand Knight in the Knights of Columbus. I coordinated our Eucharistic ministers at my church, a Catholic church, for 8 years. I was on parish council. I was all these things. So Gina's talking about intersectionality, and for me, one of the intersectional identities I had to deal with as I came to terms with who I was from a gender standpoint was the relationship to my church and things that I took for granted my entire life, and that I had to start seeing what some of this translated into. And matter of fact, I talked with Reverend Aaron when the most recent statement came out from the Vatican, making it illegal banning priests from giving blessings to gay couples. And I'm thinking, we have Pope Francis as our Pope. There is a rite in the honor of Saint Francis that allows priests to bless people's pets, but we're not going to allow priests to bless the love between two individuals and the commitment between two individuals. There's something really, really wrong and misplaced about that. And it's been nice to at least see that whatever they thought they were going to get out of putting that statement out into the world about keeping people, priests from blessing people's love, they've gotten the exact opposite reaction, and they probably ended, they almost kicked a hornet's nest. So I don't know where things are going to end up with that, but I do know for me, I found it very disheartening. And I was thinking, if we can't even get, love between two people situated, we're never going to get to a point where we're having a conversation in my church about transgender people. So, I don't know how it's all going to shake out, but it's dealing with some of that has been deeply hurtful. But I've also found a lot of love over at St. Patrick's, St. Anthony's. There's a formal LGBTQ ministry that my old priest in my church, who's not there anymore, but he hooked me up and first pointed me in that direction when I was looking for resources, and I will always thank him for that. And doing that, and there were people there for decades that have been using that group to associate with other LGBTQ people and practice their faith at the same time. So it's you have both examples out there. Someone was talking about the messaging on a lot of this stuff being from a point of view of LGBTQ people being broken. And I remember I put a queer rosary together 2 years ago, and I was actually able to do this in a Catholic church, which was amazing. More than it was one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever had. I remember when I was putting it together, I was looking for a framing prayer, something at the beginning and something at the end, and everything in the Catholic faith all treated queer people like we're broken. And I had to go outside of the Catholic tradition in order to find anything that was even remotely uplifting and recognized people being as God made them and how joyful that was. So that's my thoughts on the question, for whatever that's worth.
Thank you. Okay, is anyone else I don't know, wish to maybe speak on that? Any of the experiences they've had regarding church, or how is that, any of those relationships or impacts, or how has that impacted their lives? Okay, does anyone in the audience else have a question to ask? Okay, Carol.
You're on mute.
You muted.
Yeah, I know. I always do that. This seems somehow a little trivial after Elisa talking about family, Lindsay talking about church, but our lives are complicated webs of family and workplace and friends. And my question is about friends. Did any of you struggle or have friends that struggled with your telling them about your identity in truthful ways so that it felt like a friendship that you thought had been, significant, couldn't continue? I don't know how else to ask that. Did you have difficulty with friends?
I did not. I was blessed in that way. But I also think the more I maybe even slowly accepted myself, the more I was changing friends. Anyway, I think, I was moving away from more narrow-minded people anyway.
Go ahead, Reverend.
I don't know if I missed my opportunity for religion. I missed that. It went right by me. We moved on to something else. But I want to just say a couple of things. One is that I said this early when I introduced myself. It is heartbreaking to me when religion comes in between people and their relatives, or comes between them and themselves. Here's the thing, David, you said about being broken. I would add to that the two things I say to people right away: you're not broken and you're not alone. Okay, because this is very isolating when you feel like you're not part of the majority. And what religion does is and that's why the work that I want to do with the Yale Gender Program, I want to talk to the adults first, because religion has told us what to think and what to believe, and often has told us we don't have a place to negotiate. Mm-hmm. And the truth of it is, and I just say this a little bit because I don't want, David, you'll figure this out, that when somebody asks you a question, they got to give you 20 minutes now. Okay. Is that, because that's the length of a sermon, is to say that, this has come between, let me get back to the point of that, is that it has also caused a rift in my family. And this kind of answers the question that you had asked about separating with other people. First of all, my family just fell away, and my friends fell away sort of too, but the family was what really bothered me the most. And some of it was for religion. My older brother is a Catholic elder in the Catholic Church. He said, I'm everything the church stands against. Okay, we haven't spoken in 8 years now. And what I told him is, I said, that may be true. That may be true of your church, but it isn't true of the person we follow. And we follow the same person. And when you're ready to talk about him and his teachings, I said, the door is open. I'll pray for us until that day. My sister, my nephews, and all of them, they for their own reasons. I went against God's order. Another one was afraid that I would be beaten up by men. My sister and I are joined at the hip, and she cried for 3 straight months that she had lost her sister. So where I'm bringing this to is that everybody is in transition. And that question that you asked, it immediately changes everything when you come out with what you finally know as truth. And that changes every relationship you have with you. However that changes, it may be that people have to figure it out, or pray on it, or take some time with it, or cry for a while, or they can immediately accept. But what my therapist said, there are people that will accept you right away. There are people that have to go away and accept you and come back. And then there are people that, he said, may go away and not come back. And unfortunately, most of those people will be religious. Mm. And I've got to tell you, now in my walk, that is heartbreaking to hear that. But I want to say one more thing about that, because about religion, is that we are called by the 2 greatest commands to love ourselves as we love one another, as we love God. And that's in the Christian walk, of course. But I want to say that how can I love myself if you've told me I'm intrinsically damaged or broken, and that what I am is an abomination? I've had people approach me and ask me if they're going to burn in hell. And I can't tell you how much my heart breaks over this. But what I will tell you is the 2 greatest commands are all about love. And if our whole purpose, all of us, and Elise, I loved that you said you're creating a home of love. If all of us can create our homes of love and relationships from love and with love, and then find our ways sometimes back to our loving ourselves, because we're told not to love ourselves by this kind of language, and this kind of language, whether it's religious or not, that we have in society. So with that, it's about love. Amen.
Thank you. That moves me to share a church story. And Reverend Aaron knows the story, but it's my friend, Miss Lisa, my transgender girlfriend, loved the Lord, absolutely loved the Lord. Joined church choir after church choir, was put out of churches. You know, oh my God, you know, there's a man in a dress put out of churches. So I was 14, she was 17, and there was a tent revival in our neighborhood. Teenagers in Trenton, New Jersey could do a lot worse things than go to church. She, I, and our other friend Ella went to church, and the pastor, in the middle of everything, all of a sudden takes the microphone and goes, "Will the man in the dress leave my sanctuary? Leave my sanctuary now." And then sent ushers, I just call them guards, whatever, the Gestapo, to like lift her up under her arms. And of course, you know, hey, we were not going peacefully. None of us were going peacefully. So she's shouting, "Help me, Jesus, help me, Jesus," okay, in protest. That's it. Put us out. So we're teenagers. We walk downtown Trenton. The ages are important. 2 of us are 14, 1 is 17. The doors to the church were locked on us. We walked straight into a bar and were served. And that's where we spent the night. It's like, come on, you know, just like, get right, you know, just get right.
I want to add one thing. I know I've said a lot. I only want to say one thing that David, I believe you touched upon in your presentation, and it is the North Star for me, besides love, is that there's a 40% attempted suicide rate for transgender people. You add to that the people who that's attempted, those who haven't attempted, but have thought about it, and those who have attempted and succeeded, you're probably in the 90 percentile. So everybody who's transgender has thought about it or attempted it, and they are a vulnerable population. So it's about keeping us alive. And I need to make that point because it's that critical that we give extra compassion, kindness, and care to people that are struggling with gender identity or discovering the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm.
The life expectancy of a trans person is 36.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but Courtney had raised her hand.
Yeah, well, a lot of things have been said since then, but you know, first, what Reverend Miller just said, I mean, it couldn't be further. I mean, it is true. I don't think a day goes by that I don't think about it. It's just how it's been driven into me. Now, I can't relate to everybody because I was raised in the Jewish faith. We weren't a very observant family. We did all the high holidays and whatnot. I know I can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery, not because I'm transgender, but because I have tattoos. Like, we weren't a very religious family. But when we were talking about, you know, losing friends and whatnot, and that's a part of your life. And I lost a lot of friends along the way. You know, people that I thought were my best friends, and then all of a sudden they vanished. It was kind of like in the Avengers, and snapped the finger and they were gone. Or to them, I was gone. And there's an expression in the trans community where people refer to their former lives as their dead name. Now, that's a term I hear all the time, and I hadn't heard it until about 2 years ago. personally, I don't agree with that term, because my life before I was Courtney is still very much who I am today. You know, that person raised my children, and I didn't die. As much as people said you should have, and you're probably better off, I didn't. And the younger generation use that, and I get that, because those that are able to have understanding parents, when they say something is different about me, and are able to see a pediatrician and speak to a therapist and go on hormone blockers and not have to go through hitting puberty, the wrong puberty, and then having to deal with that for all of their lives, they can say it was their dead name, because they didn't really have that much life. They knew who they were at that early age, and they have all of these resources to them. We didn't have that. So I just had this discussion at work. So like I said, I work for ESPN, and our parent company is the Walt Disney Company, and they're very affirming with diversity and inclusion. And I'm on a board basically with members from different segments of the entire company, like Nat Geo, Marvel, Hulu, ESPN. And we talk about that. And they were dead set on saying, you know, in the gender guidelines about people changing their names from their dead name. And I said, no, I did not die. That was the name I was given when I was born. But that person, I might not have that on my driver's license and birth certificate anymore, but that's who I am. And as my kids were growing up, when they couldn't, if we were in public, call me daddy, because their mother made sure that they referred to me as their aunt without explaining whatever happened to their father, my kids came up with, well, let's call you Maddie, kind of like mommy, daddy. And so they went through a little phase where they called me Maddie. I said, I'm definitely not your mom and don't want to be your mom. I never said I was your mom. Now they call me Courtney. But there's just so much to unpack. And I don't even think, you know, an hour and a half could even do this justice to talk about all the things that people in the LGBT community go through, whether they're from my generation, previous generations, the current generations, you know, and getting back to what Reverend Miller said about thinking about suicide. It's a scary statistic, and it's a real statistic. My daughter, who identifies as gay, when she was 13, was being bullied. She was being bullied because of me. She was being bullied because she showed an affection towards girls. Now she's got a wonderful job. She's living with her girlfriend. They're buying a house together. It's just, there are happy endings, and sometimes there aren't. But that's life. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you for sharing, Courtney. Thank you for sharing. And so a lot to unpack, you know, in all this. And sometimes you lose focus of the person. You know, I think that was something that perhaps that's spoken of in the beginning, where everything, we look at a box or we look at a, you know, a construct or so, but sometimes we lose focus of people, you know, and all the labeling that we want to do. And I think this is you know, a sincere discussion about people and people's experiences. And so, you know, it's definitely very impactful, and definitely having a great, you know, opportunity just to make a difference. So there's a lot to think about. It's a lot to listen to. It's a lot to take in, you know, so there's a lot going on. So again, very appreciative for everyone for sharing this evening. All right, we still have some time, so we still have some time for some questions. from anyone in the audience. I can't necessarily read the chat so quickly. So if anyone definitely desires just to ask a question, then please feel free to do so.
I just want to point out that we can go over for the people in the audience or members of the audience that we can stay a little bit longer, so you don't have to rush out unless you actually have to.
Right. Thank you. Okay, Janice, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, but Courtney, did you want to say
I
something?
just wanted
first
it,
before people in
but
here move?
I've been talking all the time. You go first.
Well, just a question, I guess. You know, we have a lot of both religious and just community leaders, you know, here in the conversation. And is there something that you have found particularly effective in drawing more people into the conversation? My guess is that most of the people, I don't know, right? But many of the people certainly who have, you know, participated in tonight's discussion are maybe already advocates and looking for how to become a better advocate, a better ally. I don't know if that's true, but just based on the conversation, right? So I'm just wondering what kinds of things you have found to be particularly successful as we try to, you know, just expand this group, if you will.
So, and I was going to actually mention this, so that's a perfect segue into this. So like I said, I do work for the Walt Disney Company, and at ESPN, I'm an ERG advisor for ESPN Equal, which is an ERG is an employee resource group. I know David said he was a chief diversity officer, and diversity and inclusion at the Walt Disney Company is paramount. And I had a colleague who doesn't work there anymore, who was head of D&I, and she said diversity is who's on the team, inclusion is who gets to play. And that stuck with me ever since I heard that. When I started at ESPN in 2003, I hadn't transitioned yet. And in 2004, when I began my transition, no one had ever done it there before. So I had to learn with them, and they had to learn with me. Having these employee resource groups. Now in Bristol, we have 4,000 employees. At the Walt Disney Company, we have over 100,000 employees, and they have employee resource groups around the world. By educating and breaking it down, talking, we've had events called Understanding the T in LGBT, and just talk about trans. Understanding the G, what is gender? And just being able to break it down and giving people the ability to ask questions. I use social media. I am too old to be on TikTok, but I'm on TikTok because I share, and I let anybody ask me any question, because people, you do not know what you don't know. And if there aren't people that are going to tell you, they're just going to assume. And it's our job, being members of the community and as allies, you know, the T, we're allies for the L, the G, and the B, and they're allies for us too. And all different groups, you know, it's just a matter of constantly having things like this where people can ask honest questions, you know, the questions that they're afraid to Google, and just ask somebody. You know, ask somebody what their pronouns are if you aren't sure. I'd seen a comment about somebody had mentioned that before, and you know what? If you misgender somebody, it happens. You know, but if you don't know, you need to ask these questions, and I think educating, but like I said, by doing things like this, doing research, joining organizations like PFLAG and New Haven Pride and you know, other types of organizations wherever you live, it's extremely helpful.
I have a question.
Robin, you have your hand up?
Yes, sir. I have a question for, I believe it's Lisa or Eliza, Elisa, or anybody else, but Elisa came to my mind is, you said you fostered a child that I presume you hope to adopt, maybe not. What are some of the challenges that y'all have adopting an infant child as a lesbian couple, as opposed to a heterosexual couple? And how soon do you disclose that when filling out an application?
I think she might have frozen. So we may need to just go to our next question or person and then go back to her.
Okay.
Oh, there she is. She's back.
You're freezing back and forth, Elisa.
We can see you now. I think you're all set.
I froze again.
Oh, I jinxed it.
It was Eliza that was unfrozen, I thought.
Okay, I think I'm okay now. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was sharing that, you know, I do foster care as a way to live my values, right? So I don't always do foster care with the anticipation that I'm going to adopt. Sometimes it's just helping a family who needs something in the meantime while they figure some other things out because of the hands they've been dealt, the cards they've been dealt in life. And so you do your part. I'm a firm believer that it takes a village to raise children. And I am grateful to be a part of a village to help raise children in the state of Connecticut. So that sort of is one piece of it. And then in terms of being in a partnership with another woman, we disclose it immediately. There is no bias in the licensure process in the state of Connecticut. There are lots of queer families that are foster families. There are lots of single people who can't have their own children who want to foster and help be a part of a village to raise children. And so that, you know, that responsibility, I think it's why I'm an educator, right? Is because I actually love other people's children. And I believe that that is like the work of like hope and love and adults in the world. And so I disclose that information immediately. We're both licensed with the state of Connecticut, and we do what we can to help when we can. And we have not experienced any bias in that process with the Department of Children and Families, which has been really wonderful.
Thank you. I guess the state of Connecticut handles things differently. Obviously, it's a state-to-state case or state-to-state issue then. Okay, trying to stay ahead of the curve in CT. All right. Yes, is any other question from the audience?
Looks like Mike and Sue have their hand up.
Yeah, hi, this is Sue, and I just had two things. First, I wanted to mention, I'm not sure if it's still playing on Netflix, but Disclosure, which was a documentary about trans people, and I was just so overwhelmed by the scene at the end of the dad who's in a small group with other parents saying, you know, you've got a unicorn, you've got a kid who's just so self-aware, and he's just so clearly excited about this, and I just, you know, wish more people could have that consistently. I just thought that was a really good resource in showing the changes in the images of trans people over time, how they've been presented. And the organization downtown, True Colors, is something that my husband and I had been supporting, and I was so disappointed that they had to kind of go virtual only, because I thought it was so important for kids to have a place to actually just be themselves with other, you know, we were talking earlier about the importance of having, you know, one person in one space. So I was was wondering if anybody had heard whether, there were kind of other options like that or other things like that that we could help start supporting.
Q Plus picked up a lot of the slack from when True Colors stopped offering some of those services. I'm looking to see if I can find a Facebook link or something for that while we're talking here. I'll put it in chat when I find it.
And then also Comora's Cultural Corner provides a lot of support to queer youth of color, inner city youth of color, particularly.
Great.
And I do know that the folks at True Colors are trying to reconvene and kind of get things back together.
Oh, okay.
So it hasn't completely gone away. It's a transition, no pun intended, that ESPN Equal, they've reached out to us. We've reached out to them about maybe being able to help them get back on their feet if possible. So.
Great, thank you. This has been a great program. We appreciate everybody's comments and just wish we could have done it in person, but this is kind of the next best thing.
We're getting there.
If people get used to the comfort of home, I'll tell you that much. You to do that too. But I guess, perhaps maybe just finishing up. I mean, because I guess myself, I don't know when Pride Month was first instituted, but I know that's what it is, right now. So I guess one of the questions we have is how meaningful is it to have, Pride Month to you and why?
I'm queer all the time, every day, all year long. And so the month is fine. And I'm just going to be here being queer and great all 365 days of the year. So, I don't need a month. I'm happy to have it as it builds, to your point, and Ngozi, right? A moment to pause, to build awareness, to spotlight, to highlight. And I always think that that's a great benefit to the community and to folks who are looking for a way to enter. And we're just queer every day over here.
Well, I love having a Pride Month because, well, first of all, I was 15 in 1969. So, and I lived across the river from New York, and I heard about it, my friend, Miss Lisa, would be back and forth in New York every weekend. So, when it started being something to commemorate, and it was the start of a movement. So what can I say? I was alive in an adolescent, a coming of age when that was happening. So for me, it's like an anniversary of when the fire first popped. And also as a writer and a performer, I get to do a whole lot of fun things in Pride Month. Pre-COVID on the 50th anniversary, I wrote a play called One Hot Night. It's a reenactment of the Stonewall Rebellion. So we were lucky enough to have two young trans women, a Latina and an African-American young woman, play Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, and, have a little budget and be able to pay them and give them, coaching things and all that. This year, I'm working to develop, support the development of trans writing groups. There's a men's group and there's a women's group, support group. They're going to do some writing that's real healing, that's real empowering, and then look to see if people are interested in actually performing those things. I'm not only a writer, I'm a grant writer. So, I've asked some folks for some money to do that and really looking at this whole thing. I get inspired in Pride Month. Certainly we'll do it all year. But the idea of giving young trans people of color the opportunity to receive some money, right, for their thoughts, their writing, for expressing themselves is so exciting to me. So I just get really busy and energetic.
Okay, thank you, Regina. Anyone else?
I would just add two pieces. One is that the raising awareness that usually comes with education, and it comes with feeling positive about who we are, is all good. But there's another piece of it which is very interesting to me too. It's when I was coming up, there was only Provincetown. And like we would go there every summer because we would be the majority there. And so it was like our heaven. And now the Pride festivals, which only used to be in Hartford, are now throughout the state in many, many towns where people get to be who they are and celebrate that and walk in a majority with other people just like them. And I think that that's very empowering and very affirming.
All right.
And I agree, anything that makes the invisible visible is important and helpful.
Okay. Anyone else wish to speak on the importance of Pride Month? Okay.
I think the original Pride was a riot, as people are fond of saying, and trans rights in particular are under attack at the moment, trying to cut off trans kids from life-saving hormones, trying to prevent people from competing as they are, with their actual gender instead of the gender they were assigned at birth. We went through and had to deal with all the bathroom stuff. It's just a constant, seems like it's a constant battle just to have the same rights as anybody else, that's going to walk out their door and to be able to walk through society like that. Pride Month is an opportunity to continue to highlight those things so that it doesn't slip through the cracks, that people continue to see that it's going on, to continue to understand that it's not okay, and to do their part to combat that.
Okay. Thank you. Definitely leads to awareness. Definitely. Well, I'd like to say thank you for all of you for joining us. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being vulnerable as well. I know there was, one thing, Courtney, that you said that, that's made me think and pause, because it's, a story of my own life. And I believe it was you talking about how to be your best self, talking about for your kids, and how to do that. And, so in that part, there's a sharing, in that part, there's an understanding that, just speaking for myself, that I have to be the best me, that I can be, just, because of those that are attached to me. And so,
Yep.
Hearing you, say that is like, was something that I could, definitely, be able, to relate to, and that's part of what I was saying about the humanity of everything, our human, experiences. And, this being another opportunity and one of these discussions that we have, to understanding of similarities as opposed to focusing on differences, having the opportunity to look at things that, are shared versus things that can divide. And so, I can speak to the point that, these conversations that we have, can only speak for me, but it always allows for growth. It allows for intuition. It allows for expansion. It allows for education and thought. And, it challenges me as an individual, in all these discussions that we have, including, the one, this one this evening. And so a lot of it just comes to allowing to hear, stories and with sharing. And so, I say thank you, personally, for myself, for sharing. And I definitely say, thank you on behalf of our organization, our group, the Simsbury SPIRIT Council, Simsbury Problem Identification and Resolution of Issues Together. And so, this is all about, community, and it's about creating, safe spaces for people, I guess, that fit in all types of boxes. And so, it's just a thank you, again, for sharing. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for being honest. Thank you for being real, and yeah, just thank you for being here. And so, yeah, I definitely just would definitely just like to reiterate, that point. And so again, we give thanks to the Simsbury Public Library for Lindsay. She's working behind the scenes, but they're allowing the platform, for these, discussions. And so we definitely like to say thank you, to the public library and just to the, the town of Simsbury in general. I believe that perhaps there'd be that belief, understanding that in some of, a town such as Simsbury, a small town, that these are not conversations that are happening. And so I find it to, to be a blessing to be a part of this group, just because I know we're able to provoke these types of conversations. And so it's great. It allows me to be a better person, allows me to grow. And I think the ideas for the town, to be able to grow as well. And again, just to have these conversations that are not normally going, that are not normally had. Perhaps they might be had in your homes, you might be had on Facebook or such, but it allows for dialogue, again, with people that I've never connected with, never have seen, but, now in spite of that, you're still able to share. And, I find that to be very, very powerful. And so I think it speaks also to the arena that is, put out here, that it allows you, that you feel safe enough to share, many of the stories that you have shared this evening. So again, we say thank you. I'd like to put out a little memo. In 2 weeks, June 17th, we're also going to have another Let's Talk discussion, and it's going to be on Juneteenth Day. So it's going to be more of a, celebration, as well, with parts of discussion as well, but from the same time, from 6:30 to 8. So I'll definitely, I'm encouraged, you to, to sign up to join us for our next, discussion, which that will be again in celebration of Juneteenth Day, which is June 19th, and in celebration of the last slaves in Texas that were finally freed in 1865, some 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And so we celebrate those last chains of bondage, that were broken here in the United States. So yeah, so, we just say thank you all over again, Annalise, for spearheading much of this this evening, putting this awesome panel together. I don't know, I think Carol, who else? I guess if I see Elisa, I have to think maybe
Sarah.
Carol.
Sarah, thank you.
Well, so thank you all. Reverend Jean, for, I know you had to leave, but we thank you all, part of the audience. Thank you also for taking your time out to, to be a part of this event this evening, this learning event, this growing event this evening. And we look forward to having more of these. So please, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, because, this is something, this is our 11th discussion that we've had. And so, COVID's not stopping it, and so on the other side of this, we're still going to keep on going. So please keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. We're going to have a September feast in September. That'll be an outside event, so it's going to be, full of, variety of culture. So please, like I said, keep your eyes and your ears open for, things that, the Spirit Council will be doing in conjunction with organizations, in conjunction with the town of Simsbury as well. And so the idea, again, is to just to grow, to bring diversity, to bring equity, to bring inclusion, and just to allow a space for a voice that we might, I think it was, allow the invisible to become visible, and that's what we are definitely trying to do. So again, so on behalf of the Spirit Council, on behalf of the Simsbury Public Library, we say thank you for joining us. And I don't know, Regina, you had your hand up, or you just giving a little? All right, yeah, all right, cool. All right, yeah, so thank you all for joining us this evening. Everyone, please stay safe. you know, hey, let's keep up the good fight, you know, keep up the battle. Let's keep it going. All right. So everyone have a good night. We thank you again for joining us. Everyone have a good night. Thank you.